Merry Christmas, Dunchbags! What's going on? It's Landon Remixes here, and it is time for finally my top 10 EPs of 2016. Now, more or less, this video might actually be more important than my top 10 albums of the year video, just because I highly enjoyed so many more EPs this year than albums. In fact, I might have reviewed a number more of EPs than I did albums this year, just because there was just such a wide range of them this year. And just to illustrate that a little, I spent a lot longer picking out my top 10 EPs this year than I did my top 10 albums, whereas last year I had a much harder time picking out the 10 albums that I wanted to do, probably because last year I reviewed a lot more albums than I did EPs. If you guys remember, my 2015 video only had 8 EPs because I didn't really have that much to narrow it down from. And because there was such an insane amount of EPs that I reviewed this year, both in terms of full video reviews and rapid fire reviews, there's probably an EP or two that I forgot to include on this list, and I'm probably going to remember it as soon as I go to edit this video or something. But these are the ones, the top 10 that are on my mind right now, the ones that have held up really well this year. These are my top 10 EPs of 2016. Number 10 is the newest EP by Krewella called Ammunition, and this one came very close to not making the list just because there are still a couple tracks on it that I think are moderately bland. But overall, I thought this EP was really solid, showed they can actually get some progress done in their music after the departure of Rain Man. And actually, their live show on the Sweatbox tour is probably one of the best shows I've ever been to. Just super fun. They know how to really kill it with a DJ set mixed with live instruments like drums and guitar throughout it. If you don't remember my review of the EP, I had already liked it quite a bit, but just seeing these tracks live gave me so much more love for all the work that originally went into the project. My number 9 is going to be one of 2 EPs that Lemaitre released this year, the earlier of the two, 1749. I didn't actually initially check out Lemaitre until after they featured on Porter Robinson's Worlds album with their feature Polygon Dust, and I am oh so glad that I did. 1749 is arguably the duo's most ambitious and probably their hardest project yet. The EP didn't get a ton of exposure when it first came out, but it did get a lot more when Google used the EP's lead single Closer in an ad for their Pixel phone, which skyrocketed sales for that song, thankfully, because it is easily one of my favorites on the project. This EP feels like a compilation of the duo's best work yet, and it's easily my favorite project that they've done. My number 8 is probably one that I hyped up a little too much on its release. It's actually the only thing that I gave a 9.5 this year on this list. Creation by 7 Lions. Now, it's not like this EP is any less musically bad than it was at the beginning of the year. Obviously, the body of work that is Creation hasn't changed at all, but it just seems like some of the magic has diminished a little bit, especially since Millennium almost did the same thing with Ashes following the release of this EP, which was a lot less rock and metal influenced than this one was, but I tended to like it quite a bit more. And not to say 7 Lions still doesn't deserve immense recognition for this EP, because it is still very much a solid body of work. It's just lost a little bit of its luster for me. My number 7 is a prime example of just how the post-EDM scene is taking over right now. This is Borrowed Lives by Piers Fulton. I was very much so satisfied with Piers Fulton's work in Electro House, but he went and took it a step further with this EP. Just the overall process and the creation of this EP is incredible to me. He finished this and sings on every single track on this EP, even with a punctured lung, in which his accident happened partway into the creation of this thing. Though he had released some heavy guitar influenced tracks on Armada like No More and Landmines, he really stepped out with this EP outside of his electronic music comfort zone. I can comfortably say there wasn't a single song on this EP that I disliked, and it made for arguably one of the best indie pop appearances of the year. For my number 6, I'm going to cheat a little because I'm going to give it to 2 different EPs by the same artist. This is Puppet with Soft Spoken and Fear is Fleeting. I really felt like both these EPs deserved a spot on this list, but I really didn't want to take up 2 slots with the same artist, and I like these EPs fairly equally, although they do have their differences, so they are stuck in the same spot. A lot of great things that Puppet improved on with Fear is Fleeting, but there's also a lot of solid things that he left behind from the Soft Spoken EP when he went into that new project. Although I can say the tracks that weren't pre-released to Fear is Fleeting ended up being pretty surprising overall, and I think Puppet is going to keep surprising surprising us in years to come. Man, I love this EP. My number 5 is going to be Dogma by Mr. FijiWiji. I was very much so disappointed in myself for not including Mr. FijiWiji's last EP, Growing Up, in my top 8 EPs of 2015 video, because I definitely meant to. That one was easily one of my favorites, and he definitely didn't disappoint with this follow-up to it. In fact, I feel like this one was an even stronger contender for this list than that one was. Although I don't feel like this EP is extremely centered toward the theme of the artwork or the name of this EP even, I feel like this EP generally went for a similar sound. Everything sounds very organic compared to his last project. A big problem I've had with a lot of electronic albums and EPs this year is that producers don't seem to know how to use their features right, and Mr. FijiWiji, I felt like, absolutely knew how to utilize his different features both in terms of co-production and vocals. For example, I have always thought Anna Yvette had a really epic voice, and I really don't feel like a lot of her producers know how to pair that well. I think Aerochord has done a good job with it in the past, but I don't think a lot of producers really know how to utilize her vocals, and I think Mr. FijiWiji did a great job combining her with this like super cinematic dubstep sound, and it just sounds so good together. As well as Time to Say Goodbye with Aruna in Direct, one that I found myself going back to over and over and over and over and over. Number 4 is going to be Varien with My Prayers Have Become Ghosts, which is the highest Monster Cat placement on this list. When Varien goes in with a concept for a project, he always murders it. He did it with Mirai Sakai back in 2014 with 7 Minutes Dead, and I think this is the next EP he's released after that, although he did have his debut album between that one and this one. And that definitely rings true for My Prayers Have Become Ghosts. There's not a single bad cookie on this EP. Every time I turn it on, I just want to blast my eardrums out with it. There's so much diversity as well throughout the track list. Influences from rock, classic hymns, electro house. This EP is all over the place, but Varian manages to tie it all together in one spectacular Halloween-themed EP. I just love this one, and I can't wait to go back to it for years to come. I guess it's time for the big 3, and we're going to start out with my number 3, which is my favorite, by far my favorite, release that Mousetrap has ever done. This is the 9th EP from No Mana. Game over! Now, I knew No Mana was going to be something special. I've been following him since the release of 5 Up, but he absolutely blew my expectations with this EP. No Mana proved to me that he can simultaneously be the best in the minimal house game, arguably the best in the progressive house game, and maybe even one of the best in tech house. I almost missed out on this EP too, and I am so glad I didn't. With this EP, No Mana took styles that I didn't know were possible to be enjoyable and put them right at the top of my playlist. No Mana is not messing around anymore. He's coming for you, and he's gonna get you. Good lord, not picking this EP for my number 1 spot was one of the hardest decisions I've made all year on my channel. My number 2 spot is going to go to Eden with I Think You Think Too Much of Me. Especially because I feel like Eden has improved so much as a vocalist, a songwriter, or guitarist from his last EP. Straight and simple, this is the best and most diverse collection of music Eden has ever put out. So much to the point that I almost can't believe I'm not giving this EP the number 1 spot this year. And no shame, I didn't love this EP at first, but I've listened to it practically every single day since it released. I initially had a lot of picks with this EP that prevented me from giving it higher than an 8.5, but most of those have been diminished since I've been listening to it so very much. I'll be straight with you, this EP is the best collection of music individually that anyone has put out this year, by far. But there's just one little reason that this EP couldn't place number 1 this year, and that's because it simply doesn't carry the same experience that Bipolar Paradise and End Credits did. It feels a lot more disconnected. Although all of these songs are great and they show off very similar styles, I just don't feel like this EP, I Think You Think Too Much of Me, had as good of a flow as those 2 EPs. And those 2 earned my top 2 spots last year, but I just don't feel like this one matches up as well to my number 1 EP pick of this year. Jonathan, I still love you and your sexy tunes so very much. And ultimately, I think Eden is actually going to be happier with my number 1 pick because he himself suggested this one to me. It is the debut EP from Elohim. It almost feels like I'm cheating for putting this EP at number 1 because it literally is 10 tracks long, the longest EP on this list. There's not a whole lot I can say about this EP that I didn't already cover in my review of it. Of course, that's going to be linked in the description with the rest of them. Just for a second, think outside of the realm of electronic music. Elohim is going to be the next big thing in music. Call it indie pop, call it post pop, I don't care what you call it, this stuff is delicious. From her unique voice, to her creative lyrics, to her absolutely insane production, especially the production, I can't stress that enough. You will not find another album or EP like this year. Check out her live shows or her music videos on YouTube. I'm telling you, this girl is doing a better job of just being herself as an artist than anyone else I know in the scene. I would highly recommend this EP to anyone watching, although I would especially recommend it to fans of indie-tronic music like myself. I think you're going to have your mind blown by this EP. It's so fun. But I would definitely recommend everything else on this list as well, and as always, I'm going to have the Spotify links for those in the description tagged to the EP names. I'm Landon Remixes. I hope you guys enjoyed my list, and have a Merry Christmas.